The Department of Public Health and Human Services is pleased to bring you Aging Horizons. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, fraud, legal issues, veterans benefits, and caregiving. Aging Horizons is a program dedicated to inform and prepare Montanans on these timely issues, making a difference to you and your loved ones. Here now is today's program host.
Today on Aging Horizons, we're going to be speaking with Catherine Van Horn. She's a supervising attorney with Montana Legal Services, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Indian law, all about why you might need an Indian will and what the difference is, and a little bit about tribal law all across Montana. There's a lot of really important information. You're definitely not going to want to miss Aging Horizons today, so make sure you stay tuned.
You've probably seen some big-name celebrities on your TV lately talking about all the Medicare benefits you're missing out on. But the insurance companies who are paying for these ads may be pushing benefits not available in Montana. Fortunately, help is available from a friendly state health insurance assistance program counselor who can help you sort it all out. It's free, and we screen everyone for eligibility regardless of your zip code. It's Montanans helping Montanans. Call today.
This is Bill. He just received his new Medicare card and is following some simple rules to protect himself from fraud. He knows to never give out his Medicare, Social Security, or bank number over the phone. And this is Nancy. She knows that to detect any problems, she always reads her Medicare Summary Notice or Medicare Advantage EOB to make sure the billing is correct. Both Bill and Nancy know that anything suspicious can be reported to Montana SMP at 1-800-551-3191.
Here in Montana, we love our outdoor activities. Unfortunately, few of them are risk-free. Indeed, Montana is second in the nation per capita in head injuries that can destroy the lives of people we love. That's why you should insist your family always wear protective helmets. But you can do even more. When you fill out your vehicle registration this year, circle the Y and donate $1 to support traumatic brain injury prevention and education. Now that's using the old noggin.
Providing long-term care for someone in need is a labor of love, but it is a labor. Time apart is healthy and necessary both for the caregiver and the person receiving care. It allows each a respite, time to relax and recharge. If you're a long-term caregiver, visit the new Lifespan Respite website. Financial assistance may be available. Respite for caregivers. It's okay to need it. It's okay to want it. It's okay to get it.
Welcome to Aging Horizons, brought to you by the Department of Public Health and Human Services. I'm your host, Katie Lovell. Today we're going to be speaking with Catherine Van Horn, who is a supervising attorney with Montana Legal Services, and she's going to give us a little bit of information about Indian law. Kate, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate your time. So let's talk a little bit about an Indian will. When someone says, I might need an Indian will, what does that mean?
Yes, it's a little bit different since most of the time we don't have different wills for different groups of people.
Sure.
But for enrolled tribal members, there is a different law that applies. So most of us, the only real law that applies to our estates is state law, whatever state you live in. But for tribal members, they also have a federal law that applies to their estates called the American Indian Probate Reform Act. And it has to do with primarily tribal trust land, so a unique land status that exists on reservations that doesn't really exist elsewhere.
Okay.
So because of that law, it's important to have a will drafted by somebody who knows how to make sure that all of your assets that are going in your will are compliant with APRA.
Now, Montana has 7 different communities all across the state. Are there different Indian wills for each of those communities, or is this something that is more universal?
Well, it's a little bit of a trick question. So APRA applies to all tribal communities in Montana, but it's also true that each tribe has their own laws concerning estates and probates. So all of the wills drafted in Montana for Native people have to be compliant with APRA, but you also have to be compliant with that individual tribe's probate code. So they're different, but they're all compliant with APRA.
When someone is thinking about, maybe I need an Indian will, maybe I don't, what are the first things that they should think about when trying to decide whether or not that applies to them?
Yes. So, first and most obvious, are you enrolled or eligible for enrollment in a federally recognized tribe?
Okay.
But there can be some complexities around that as well. So also, are your family members enrolled or eligible for enrollment? Your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandpa. Do you own trust land because you're a descendant in some way? So those are the things you'd want to be thinking about, is your enrollment and what assets you own. Are there anything that's in trust on the reservation?
Sure. Now, Kate, I think that there is a lot of confusion around why someone might want to do an Indian will in general. What is the benefit, or what is the reason that folks want to do an Indian will to take care of their trust land?
Absolutely. Good question. So for when you die and you don't have a will, that's called dying intestate. And when you die intestate, there are laws, the law says this is what's going to happen with your assets if you haven't said.
Sure.
APRA, unlike most state laws about intestate succession, isn't focused on doing what we think most people generally would want. It's focused on making sure that trust land doesn't become more fractionated, so that there's tons and tons of co-owners on a single tract of land. So sometimes the provisions of APRA that say what will happen if you die without a will are not at all consistent with what people want. Yeah. And it can actually end up that only your oldest child inherits from you. So a lot of times people will want to do a will because they want to try to avoid what will happen if they pass away without a will, and they want to be able to make sure that their assets are going to be given out more equitably amongst their heirs, more fairly amongst their heirs.
I know that folks can have land both in Montana and they can have trust land outside of Montana. Do folks need to do a will for each state in which they have land?
No, they really shouldn't. And people ask that all the time. And I always say, please don't. We want to have only one will. Because what can happen is if you have multiple wills, well, maybe you pass away and we find one will and we probate this whole will and we think that's what they said that they wanted to occur, and some things were left out. So we just have to go as though you passed away without a will as to those things. And then later we find this other will and we go, oh shoot, they did have things that they wanted done with these specific assets, but they were only included in a separate will.
Sure.
So we want to do only one will that includes all of your land and all of your assets on reservation, off reservation, in Montana, outside of Montana, etc.
When folks are looking at, I really have no idea where I have land, I don't know what my trust land looks like, where can they get some of that information?
Yes, well, they can go to the BIA. So if they are located in a reservation-based community, there will be a local agency office at that community. And there's also the BIA regional office in Billings that covers the whole Rocky Mountain region. So they can go in person or call or email and request a copy of it's called an ITI report, an individual tribal interests report. And that will show all of the trust land that they own in the whole country.
I know that a lot of folks, at least that we work with, a lot of times don't do their estate planning because they're really afraid of the cost of doing so. Can you tell me a little bit about how Montana Legal Services offers its services to folks?
Yes, absolutely. So our services are completely free of charge. Of course, people have to be eligible for services, which usually means being low income. But within the tribal law practice group that I work in, we have some additional contracts and grants that allow us to do specifically Indian wills for people who are a little bit maybe over that income threshold. So what they should really do is just call and apply, and we'll do the best that we can to get them services or to find somebody who could do it for them.
And what about if folks have custody of or have actual minor children? Are they still able to do service or to receive services?
Absolutely, yes.
Wonderful. And Kate, when people are thinking about, I don't need a will, I'm only 30, I don't need a will, I'm only 25, I don't need a will, I'm only 60, when should people do a will?
I think the best time to do a will is today. So we don't think that you're too young. We can definitely do it at any time. And then if your situation changes substantially over time after you've done your will, then we can always redo it. It's not set in stone.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about more Indian law in general and a little bit more about what Montana Legal Services can do to help. So make sure you stay tuned.
Every 65 seconds, someone is affected with Alzheimer's or other dementias. Many become isolated at a time when help is most needed. If you or someone you love is affected, help is available, both for people with memory loss and their caregivers. Memory loss can feel frightening, but you are not alone. Call the free 24/7 Alzheimer's Association helpline, 800-272-3900, for guidance and support.
Elder abuse is a growing problem, and it's happening right here in our Montana communities. At least 1 in 10 older adults are victims of physical or emotional abuse, financial exploitation, or neglect. To get help or report elder abuse, call your local area agency on aging or Adult Protective Services at 1-844-277-9300.
Today, class, we'll be discussing the term ombudsman, a word we borrowed from the Swedes and never gave back. Say you're a resident or you have a loved one in long-term care. Now, what do you do if you're not happy with the care and services you receive? You call your long-term care ombudsman, of course. Your ombudsman is available to support you and your rights. An advocate on your behalf could be the ticket. This is your home. If you have questions, the numbers right there below me have all the answers. Class dismissed.
Welcome back to Aging Horizons. Today we're speaking with Catherine Van Horn, who is a supervising attorney with Montana Legal Services. We're talking all about Indian law. Catherine, thank you so much for being with us today. Let's talk a little bit about what you do. What is the Indian Law Practice Group?
Yes, so the Indian Law Practice Group, or the Tribal Law Practice Group, is a specific practice group within MLSA that focuses on federal Indian law and tribal law issues. So we handle all types of issues that fall within that, whether it be utility shutoffs or family law issues or wills and estates, as we were just talking about. But it's anything that has to do with tribal law, the laws that tribes make to govern their own members, or federal Indian law.
So let's start with a little bit about federal Indian law. Tell me a little bit about how this started and sort of how we've progressed through it throughout the decades.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, the start of federal Indian law really goes back to, initial colonization of the United States. Of course, we discovered this land, but it wasn't really discovered. It was already inhabited by people.
Sure. And
we had to come up with some way to govern relationships between people who already lived here and had societies and, civilizations going on, and people who were here and wanting to start the country, the United States. So the basis of federal Indian law is in the United States Constitution and in federal law throughout history to govern how does the United States as a government relate to tribes as sovereign nations and as separate governments.
So when we look at the relationship between the United States federal government and tribes, is that one of, of sovereign nations? Is it one of independent governing bodies? How do those governments interact with one another?
Yeah, so, it's really sometimes people think of it as being maybe some type of subordinate relationship where the federal government can tell and instruct tribes what they need to do. And of course, in some ways that's true. Just like within Montana, there are ways in which we have to do things as a state in compliance with what the federal government requires. But primarily, that is a government-to-government relationship. So each government has their domain of things that they have sovereign authority over. Here's what the federal government has sovereign authority over. Here's what tribes have sovereign authority over. And so then to work together, they have to do things like create treaties and come up with meetings and official delegations that work back and forth. One example would be cross-deputization. Sure. Something that people would maybe know about, that federal or state agents can't necessarily do something unless the tribal authorities have designated them and delegated that authority through a cross-deputization agreement to allow them to do those law enforcement activities within the reservation.
When you look at the scope of federal Indian law, in what ways does that interact with an individual? So what parts of your life as an enrolled tribal member would be affected by federal Indian law?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in some ways the answer is day to day, not a lot, sure. But then federal Indian law is also so expansive in some ways. Federal Indian law concerns jurisdiction. What do tribes have the authority to make laws about and enforce laws about. So can a tribe make laws about what a utility service provider, when and where they can shut off services to elderly or indigent members during the winters?
Sure.
We have that in Montana with our Public Service Commission, and there's rules around that. Can the tribes make those rules? So some of those day-to-day minutia even are governed by federal Indian law, because it can be a question as to can they do this utility shut off my services? Crow law says they can't do that. Can they do that? Can Crow law say that they can't do that? So in some ways it can be really present in people's everyday lives that they don't necessarily always realize.
Sure. When you look at your cases in general, what are some of the main areas of practice that you guys work in?
Absolutely. So it's very similar to MLSA as a whole, with the exception of wills and estate planning services.
Sure.
So probably about 50% of my practice is wills or probates or other estate planning issues. And then the rest of the 50% is very representative of what we see. What are people's just common day-to-day legal issues that they have, where their personal life is interacting with the legal system? Family law, dissolutions, custody, adoption, guardianship. We also see a fair amount of consumer law issues, utility shutoffs, car repossessions. We see issues with benefits, TANF, whether tribally or state administered. And then recently, MLSA as a whole and the Tribal Law Practice Group as well, since the pandemic, have seen more issues with evictions and housing issues.
Absolutely. How do the majority of your clients get to you?
That's a good question. We have clients that come in through a lot of different ways. So people can, call MLSA as a whole. If they have a tribal law issue, they're going to get routed to me. They call my number, they call my assistant's number, they can apply online, they can email us. But we also do find that, especially for elders, a lot of people aren't super comfortable with just calling a random 1-800 number in Helena and talking about something that's really hard.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of in-person outreach, and we spend a lot of the summer driving all around Montana, visiting the reservation-based communities, and people just walk in if they're able to.
That's really wonderful. When we get back, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between federal Indian law and then state tribal law. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that. And so when we get back, you're going to want to stay tuned, because we're going to talk a little bit about those intersections, and we're also going to talk a little bit about some of Montana Legal Services resources for the community and how you can apply for services if you are in need of those. So make sure you stay tuned to Aging Horizons.
Perhaps our regular viewers have noticed that we've been missing a host for the last several months. In July, our favorite person, Kimmy Everman, unexpectedly passed away, and we'd like to take a few moments now to share some memories that we have of her.
For many of us, watching Aging Horizons with Kimmy as the host was like talking to a friend, and for Kimmy, that's exactly what it was. She cared about all of the viewers of Montana on Aging Horizons as if they were her personal friends. She wanted each of us to live the best possible life and connect to as many services as possible. She had no greater joy in life than connecting advocates to others that could help Montanans across the state with problems that they maybe didn't know as much about. Losing Kimmy was a great loss to the state of Montana, but the work that she did will live on in the hearts and minds and Rolodexes of so many of us at the state.
So working with Kimmy was always a very fun experience for me. She lit up a room with her smile, and I loved her giggle. She had this giggle that was the cutest, most happiest spreading of joy that I could describe. She also was very passionate about her work, about helping veterans, and about her dog Sophie.
Kimmy's been my friend, my coworker, and my mentor for over 20 years. She has taught me so much about not only Medicare, but working with people. She had a great sense of compassion and love, especially for veterans, animals, and the underdog. She loved working with seniors and people with disabilities. That was her heart. She will be greatly missed.
Aging Horizons has been on the air for over 30 years, and I've had the pleasure of working with these wonderful ladies and everybody in senior long-term care that length of time, including Kimmy Everman. And whenever we got done with the show, I just loved her laughter, which everybody's commented here. It was like we're getting away with something. Isn't this fun? And I will sincerely miss both that and her.
Welcome back to Aging Horizons. Today we were speaking with Catherine Van Horn, who is a supervising attorney with Montana Legal Services, and we're talking all about Indian law. So Catherine, we've talked a little bit about federal Indian law, but there's a difference between federal Indian law and tribal law. So explain that difference to me.
Yeah. So it's not super cut and dried, but the way that I like to think about it, that's generally accurate, is that federal Indian law usually governs the tribe and tribal members' interrelationship with external parties, so state actors, federal government, federal actors, etc. And then tribal law and federal Indian law is created by the federal government.
Sure.
And then tribal law mostly governs internal tribal matters and internal relationships. So rules between tribal members, how's the government going to function, what are people going to be allowed to do, what's legal activity, what's illegal activity, etc. And that's created by the tribes.
So Montana has 8 federally recognized tribes. Are there 8 sets of laws?
Yes. Yes, there are.
Yeah, that's good to know. And so when someone is working in a tribal community, Crow versus Northern Cheyenne versus Blackfeet, there's a huge difference, or there could be potentially, right?
Absolutely. So again, it's similar to state, right? The laws in Montana don't look wildly different from the laws of North Dakota. If you were to look at the laws of North Dakota, you would say, okay, yeah, this seems familiar, generally accepted rules around morality and ethics. But they can vary, and they can vary sometimes in significant ways, such as, is a grandparent allowed to petition for custody independently over a grandchild or not? That can really make a difference about what's legally allowed or not. So you always need to make sure when you're working in a tribal court or in a tribal community that you familiarize yourself with the local laws and don't assume that the laws are going to be the same as the state or the same as another tribal community.
And does your project work in all of the communities across the state?
Yep, we work in all Montana tribal communities.
That's wonderful. And I know that you guys are starting a new project, the Rural Tribal Incubator Project. Is that correct?
Yes.
I get that right? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we have our Tribal Advocacy Incubator Project, and it's modeled off of MLSA's Rural Incubator Project that works to expand services in rural communities, which we know is an issue, and tribal communities are rural communities.
Sure.
So through that model, we at Montana Legal Services, we have a staff member, Valerie Fallsdown, who created this project, and we recruit and train and mentor individuals who are interested in becoming tribal lay advocates. So a tribal lay advocate is somebody who is not typically a licensed attorney, but what they are is licensed by that tribal community to represent individuals in tribal court with tribal law legal matters.
Okay.
So we train them, and then we make referrals of cases that we would not otherwise be able to handle, and then they will assist clients on either sometimes a pro bono basis and sometimes a modest means basis, so no more than $60 to $120 per hour.
That's really amazing. I know services in tribal communities, just like services in most rural communities, are really hard to come by.
Yep, they're super limited, and then we know that there are really limited legal resources in terms of attorneys in rural communities. There's sometimes counties that have only one attorney within that county.
Sure.
And then the additional twist for tribal communities is that you have to get licensed to practice in that tribal court. So if there's a very low number of attorneys and none or maybe only one of them has taken the initiative to go take the tribal bar exam and get licensed, then there's really can be no resources available sometimes.
Absolutely, a huge barrier for our members, of our Montana State members who are living in tribal communities.
Yeah.
Kate, tell me a little bit about some of the resources that Montana Legal Services offers. I know, sometimes people are just maybe starting to look at legal resources or maybe have a legal question that they're not ready to talk about with anyone yet. What are some of the resources that Montana Legal Services offers?
Yep, absolutely. So we have primarily the website that we maintain is montanalawhelp.com, and on that website you can find information and forms about common everyday legal issues, so state court issues, as well as some more limited resources for Indian wills or tribal law related issues. You can find informational brochures or just articles about certain things you might want to consider if you're going to want to think about drafting a will or considering getting a parenting plan. All of that is available on the website.
And when folks are thinking, all right, I definitely have a legal issue, I'm ready to talk to someone, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So if they can, like I said, there's a lot of different ways that you can call Montana Legal Services, our regular helpline. You can apply on our website. You can get linked there from the montanalawhelp.org. And then people can always just reach out to me directly at my extension. And if I'm not able to help them, then I will try to find the person who is able to help them.
That's really wonderful. And I know there are so many communities that just could use at least 7 more Catherine Van Horns in the world. So that's wonderful that there is that incubator project. I want to talk just a little bit about some of those areas where you see, is there any areas of the law that you're seeing a lot of growth recently? I know you talked about maybe housing.
Yep, housing for sure. I think that tribal communities have seen not as much of a crisis as we have across Montana as a whole in terms of evictions particularly, because a lot of the housing on reservations is run by tribal housing, and so the tribal housing entities are not as interested in evicting people as sometimes maybe a private landlord might be.
Sure.
But we've seen also as well in tribal communities for years, even before the pandemic, a real lack of housing generally speaking. So development issues, issues with getting mortgages. So all of that existed before the pandemic, and it was only exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a huge problem in rural communities. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for being with us. I think it's so important that folks know that you exist and that there's resources for folks. If they have any questions, again, how do they get in touch with you? Just one more time.
Yep, they can just reach out to me through my number at Montana Legal Services Association, which is 406-442-9830, extension 142.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it. Thank you for staying tuned to Aging Horizons, and make sure you catch us next week. Thank you.
Special thanks to the Department of Public Health and Human Services for their continued support. Hosts on Aging Horizons are program specialists at the Montana Office on Aging. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions. For more information about Aging Horizons, call the Department of Public Health and Human Services toll-free at 800-332-2272.